All right. And yeah, so this is going to be a continuation from not yesterday, it's Tuesday's study group with when we introduced time series. We did some talk about trends. We'll finish that aspect today. And then we'll actually move into, we'll talk about the different types of trends and we'll talk about modeling. I kind of mentioned it. I think everyone was here when I mentioned it, but I think next week when we have office hours, we'll use some of that office hours to maybe do a code along for like a modeling session. That way, it's kind of like the second half of section 32. So today's going to be a blend of like parts of section 31, parts of section 32, and then next week we'll follow up with more 32. Okay. But the first thing I wanted to share a little bit is, before we get into it, is I know Tom said brought up about ravel in particular, which we used a lot yesterday. I keep saying yesterday, but like last study group. So I want to talk about that a little bit before we go on. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see here. Okay. And rearrange my windows. Okay. So, all right. So this is actually for, I think, oh, Ben actually, I shared it with Ben, but you guys should be able to find this on the repos as needed. But this is actually our first one, our intro. And I'm just going to specifically look at this one. I split up into 3 parts. So I think the original was actually these 3 cells were actually all merged together. I kind of split them up so we can see a little bit easier. So I'm actually going to run everything above here. So I have it all set. Okay, I think that should run good. Okay, so if you guys remember, kind of going back a little bit, we loaded our data set called NYSE, right? And I'll actually print out NYSE here. So NYSE is basically just our data set that we started off, our data frame. Starting off, you can see our monthly returns, right? And what we wanted to do next is basically plot out the, what's it called? The returns by year. So like each year would be its own separate plot over the month. So that way we could look at those all together. And so we kind of did this part, and I haven't changed anything yet, but the first thing we did was actually do a group by. So we're grouping it by, and this essentially will allow us to annually using this date time. So basically it'll group it together by year. And if I run this now, note that this is a group by data frame now. So if I actually try doing, let's see here, groups, trying this, it's basically just an object here because it doesn't know what to group it by, like it doesn't have any summary statistics for you to do. So it's just waiting for you to do something with it. So basically it's all set and ready. It's split up by years essentially. And what we're going to do is make a new data frame, NYSE annual. So this is going to contain basically our information. And so you can think of it like we started off with something like this, which has all the time as like the actual index. And then the value is those those returns, right? Well, what we want to do to graph out each as an individual plot, each row, I'm going to try to see if I can kind of draw this out a little bit. Oh, I guess I can draw it out. I was going to make it more difficult for myself. So you mentioned we have this data frame here. What we ultimately want to do is have essentially like each data frame itself is going to be, I'm sorry, not each data frame, each row in the data frame is going to be like the year. So like 1961, right? And then the next one will be 1962. And then each of these guys in the column here is actually going to be a month. So like the first month, the second month, the third month, all the way through 12 months. And then the value in here would actually be this return. So you can kind of see this like, you know, this value right here would be 0.82. So this would go into this one right here. This one would go into here and so on, right? So you would get this part and then we get to 1962, and we fill out the next row. And that's essentially what we want to do. So this is a one way of us to approach it. Okay, so what we did is we grouped it by year, so that way it's all set for us to aggregate on there. And that's what this is going to do, this for loop right here. Okay, so let me go ahead and clear this out and roll it down. So I'm trying to take this one step at a time, right? So note that we make it our empty data frame. So we're just basically putting nothing in there, okay? And what's gonna happen here is that we're gonna take year from year groups, because remember, it's gonna be grouped by year. So that means gonna be our index, right? So we actually have this, I'm sorry, we're having our, how do I say this? The first group is going to be like this data frame or this group by data frame, and we're getting just the year from it itself.
Okay. I wanted to ask about that.
Yeah.
So in the for loop, you have the YR dot year. So it's basically taking from your index a subset of your index to just give you back the year because it's showing year, month, date, or whatever, or year, month, day.
Yeah, I think I actually misspoke the second time. So let's just check out what this year is, right? So what I'm going to do a for loop, display YR, see what that is, and then we'll break it so it doesn't continue on. So you can see here, it's just a timestamp. So this is basically a date time object. So if I do maybe like display type, let's see what, I think it's a date time. Oh, timestamp. So this is a similar thing to date time object itself. But so what we're doing actually is this year is representing, in that column is a date time object, or I should really say a timestamp, and we're getting the year specifically from this timestamp. So if I do year.year, it should just give me 1961, right? Oh, there we go. So 1961. Does that make sense? Okay. So yeah, I'm just taking this year right here, this year.year, to say, okay, 1961, right, which will be that column essentially. Sorry, yeah, for that specific row, right, it's going to be 1961 is going to have, I'm sorry, I'm misspeaking. It should be the column. We'll have the column and those values will be wrapped into this part. Basically, this will be giving out as a series. So what I wanted to show a little bit is before I get into this whole thing, is to kind of break each part down, right? So we have our group.values, and this group right here is going to be our actual data frame. Or I should say, I guess it's technically a series, but group.values. And so if I do a display here, what you'll see are the different values, but they're specifically grouped for that specific year. So if I run this now, you'll see that basically I have all of these monthly returns. Right?
So for when you say year dash group, couldn't you make that anything? You could say for X comma Y in year groups, or does it actually, right? Like it's just referring to the two columns that you have. Is that right?
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So like that's what this is being split up.
That's why I'm a little confused. Like when you showed the type of the YR and it showed that it's like a time, what did it say? What kind of
timestamp?
Timestamp. I mean, if you had done that for X, it would also say it's a timestamp, correct? Because it's just whatever. It's just mimicking whatever that first column is in the data frame you have, correct?
Yeah, exactly. I think I can show you maybe a little bit if I do this real quickly. So remember, we haven't changed NYSE, right? So we can look at this. Oh, this isn't going to work because that's not, it's by its index. But the idea there is that this X is just pulling up, like you said, that first column. The group is that other column right here.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah.
It's kind of tough to visualize because there's not a way for me to show this without like, doing something on it.
No, I'm following you though. I mean, that makes sense.
Cool.
So group is monthly return, the monthly return column.
That's right. And you can see here, so for example, if I just do maybe just group, you can see it's just all of this, but it's for that 1 year, right? And notice that it stops right here. There's no extra values. So if I do group.values here, this is going to return a series of just for each of those indexes, right? It's going to show these guys. And note this is a NumPy array now, right? Or a series. But note that there's kind of this funkiness to it, is that it's not just a 1D array, it's technically a 2D array, right? Because we have this encompassing bracket, right? And then each value is in its own separate part. What we ideally want is actually having something that looks kind of like, let me show real quick. Drawing out. We want something that looks kind of like, okay, here's a number. So let's say 3, 2, 1, closing bracket. Right now what we have is something that looks like this. Right? Which is close to what we have, but this isn't, we want this to actually be the whole series itself.
Why does that make it a 2D array? The way that it is with those two brackets there.
So I think this might be easier if I go let's say if I go 1, 2, 3, 4, like this. Does that make sense? So this would be a 2D array by itself. Okay, and this is an NumPy array. And just note that basically, if I think I can print this out real quick. So I think this is important because you're gonna probably use a ravel in the project itself, so to understand like how to manipulate these different objects, right? So we have this NumPy array. We have like 1, 2. Let's do 3, 4. Okay, and if I go ahead and display this, right, you can see that's kind of like how it sets up. You can imagine it like 2-dimensional right here. I could also add in like, let's say 5, 6, let's say 7, right? And you can see here, it's still a 2D array. It's just a long array. It's not a square kind of thing. So the other side of this would just be like, oh, what if I had just like one value each one? See, and that's, in that case, it's technically a 2D array. It's just that there's one element in each row, right? Compared to this part right here, if I got rid of this, that right there is our one-dimensional array. Okay, and that's really what we want. We want something that looks like this. So the problem is, it's like, well, okay, like we have something close to it. Like we have all the values. It's almost in its right structure. It's just not in the right dimension, right? So what we can do is actually do something ravel. So I kind of mentioned this, I think in the chat earlier, but let's say numpy ravel. And let me go ahead and clear this out so I can focus on that. Okay, so if I look at this case, you can see here basically the idea of numpy, and this is just the documentation, right? Basically, it's going to return a flattened array. When we say flattened, basically it means like, think of it like squishing it down one dimension. So you can see here, oops, you can see here a, what am I looking at? There it is, a two-dimensional array, right? And then we do a flatten to basically make it into a 1D array here. Okay. Makes sense. And so that's essentially what we're doing here, except instead of having like, you know, this one part, it's going to be each element is its own separate like little box. Okay. So let's see, going back to here. If I do our ravel now, so there we go. What this is going to do, I keep putting a comment there actually. Okay. If I do my ravel now, what it's going to do is take this whole array here and it's going to flatten down to one dimension. So we should hopefully see something that looks closer to like this long array here. And if I do that now, you'll see that's what I get. So this will be nice because now I can actually put this in the series of being like, okay, for each column, essentially this 1961 column, right, is going to have these values going forward and whatnot. So once I have that part ready, let's see if I go ahead and do this. And I'll go ahead and display, this is not really efficient, but for demonstrative purposes, I'll do display.nysc, right? And we'll go ahead and get rid of this guy, and then we'll get rid of this. So now what we're doing basically is saying, okay, 1961, right? That column for 1961, we're making a new column essentially in that data frame, that's going to equal basically this certain array, right? And if I go and run this, you can see here, the first time it goes like, okay, 1961, and you can see 0 through 12. The next one, let's here. Oh, I guess that's not a great example, right? Because I actually got this year. Sorry, I renamed it to X. So now if I do it, you can see basically it's adding a new column each time. Because remember, this .ravel is returning a series. And so basically that series is getting slapped on top with a new column name. Okay. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay, any questions on this? On like how this kind of was formed out from the group by down to doing the ravel itself and then creating it onto a new data frame. All right, awesome, cool. And just to remind you guys how this functions, right? Remember the whole point of making this data frame, which is going to look like this at the very end. I just can do a plot, and now I can actually plot it out, and it basically will plot each one now on its own separate because I made subplots equal true.
Why did it show it adding a column each time? Like I think when I did it, it was just one full thing with all the different years as columns.
It depends where you put it. If you put it like outside the for loop, it would print out just one.
Oh,
like this. That might be why.
Yeah.
But I have it in here to show each individual time. That's just to emphasize it's being put on each part.
Okay, that makes sense.
Cool. All right. Awesome. So I just wanted to show that because Ravel is something you likely will use for the project to help format it and tease out the right shape from it. Okay. Cool. So once we have that right shape, we can actually plot. All right, so that kind of, I know it took a little bit longer than probably like, we would have had, but I think it's an important aspect. So I'm glad we got over that part.